Hello, everyone. Hello. Yeah, I've pressed all the buttons. Brilliant. It's Lorecrimes. Hello,
Yeah.
everyone. It's
Evening,
Double Dip
brothers
Friday.
and sisters.
We hope you
Colin, you're
enjoyed.
muted.
God damn it. Thank you, Hal.
Brilliant. Well, we hope you enjoyed. Earlier today, there was a release of us taking over Astartes Anonymous, and you get us again twice in one day. Aren't you lucky? We don't have Eli today.
That means.
If people want to go
3
check that
times a
out,
week
by
as
the
well.
way, we
Oh my
we reviewed terrible. Well, not say terrible. We reviewed some slightly beamed, ugly Warhammer models, so that was a good time. I don't know what that currency is. We have a donation by Michael Sarkozy.
Karuna?
Thank you. He says
Maybe.
this unworthy
Thank
slave
you.
lower than even the dirt beneath the crypt thrall's feet swears on the royal Hecker of the Pelikar dynasty. I'm terrible.
Pirilek? Or Pilarek, yeah.
Pelikar dynasty that the worshipper of the discarded tool of the old ones will be free of his corruption. Also, Menep is a real homie. Thank you so much, brother. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm not gonna lie, I feel like I had an aneurysm halfway through that. I apologize. Lucy McShooty says, "Is there a spell to make Colin's bed?" Yes, he casts.
Leave me alone. It's made. You can see it. The pillow's sticking out. It's fine.
He casts poor work schedule. Just not
yeah,
work ethic schedule.
That's not a spell. That's a passive. That's just always running.
Yeah, it's a passive debuff. Welcome everyone to another episode of Lorecrimes. Today talking about magic.
Really quickly, just go through everything that happened before we started. Thanks, Michael Sarkozy. Hope I said that right. There's the tilde. Welcome to Lore Criminal. Luis 1945 DGB's called Colleen a warp spawn. Yeah, it is what it is. Also, thank you for calling me Colleen. And Bloody Shirt Music with the 2 Lorecrime gift membership. Thank you.
DJ Beast also says, Hal, your paid actor is doing quite well. Bald. Damn, man. Damn.
Well, also, we apologize. We don't have Eli today. He's busy being a married man with commitments, but it's fine. But what are we talking about today, Hal? What's going on?
Magic, brothers and sisters. If anyone is new to Warhammer or kind of just dip slightly into Warhammer, this is Warhammer 40k and fantasy. We're going to go into explaining magic, and it's kind of convoluted and a little bit confusing. Warhammer, because does it even really have magic, or is it just do people believe hard enough? But before we get into some magic, we do have the previous question of the week, which is a little bit of a while ago. Andy, to that. We also have a donation by Incline Backup. Thank you, brother. Again, he says we also be talking about fantasy / AOS magic, and this magic of our round lord, of course. Must be we'll be talking about Warhammer fantasy magic as well, because obviously both Warhammer universes are kind of linked, but there's a few differences. But we'll be getting all into that. Andy, what was the previous question of the week?
Okay, so last time the hashtag was #reason. So what was your reason for launching a crusade, basically? And I picked out 3. So the first one is from the Rude Canadian 8068 saying #reason because the Age of Strife isn't going to end itself, which is a fair point. We also had one from Akuma King 1 who said #reason. I would tell humanity that all of humanity has to be united in order to supply everyone with either elf waifus or husbandos.
Yeah.
That's one heck of a reason to launch a crusade.
God, I feel like
disagrees.
Black Templars itching already. They're itching. Oh, man.
We also got a donation, by the way, from Donkey Man USA saying, can't find any Skaven Storm Fiends. How else can I make my Redemptor Dread Rats? I don't know.
We do need to set up a Discord so we can have people show their awesome conversions.
There are the new Rat Ogres regular. Those could probably do. Those models are real good.
Shout out to it. It was a channel, Eons of Battle, who had the idea of making fake fur on like his Rat Ogre conversion. And it actually looks like really damn impressive. Another donation by resident best name ever, Kabandus Mighty Schlong of Cygnus. I want Urethra Cactus to be a spell. Damn,
Ugh.
brother. Damn.
The last question of the week answer we had last week was from Kaishen021 saying hashtag reason. Obviously, the only good reason to unify Terra and conquer the stars is that GW used up all of Terra's crude oil and now need more in order to feed the whole Warhammer community's plastic addiction. Amen to that.
Did someone say oil? I can hear the eagles immediately.
We are on our way already.
Yeah.
Oh, say, can you?
Why the dance early light?
I do love I do indulge and love the American meme of just like immediate overlapping blaring eagle sounds with people being like waving flags and stuff like that.
What the fuck is a kilometer?
I am an enjoyer of that meme. We do have another question of the week for this week, brothers. It's a bit on point. It's if you could cast or you can make any new spell, what would it do and what would the effects be? Obviously, make it funny if you can, because you can go anywhere with this one. I think I said earlier before we started, I would cast a spell to essentially fix all of the Star Wars Disney properties because it hurts too much. Honestly, it just I can't take it anymore. I don't know if Andy and
Ludi McShooty, I'm gonna beat you to death.
That's not a spell he's casting.
Are you gonna?
Do you want to read what he said?
Are you going to talk about the garbage magic of DS2? No, but I might talk about the best magic system in any FromSoft game from Dark Souls 2.
It's not.
It is.
I'm just hearing white noise. I don't know what's going on. It's hard to understand. But yeah,
oh no, Andy first.
I did see. I was watching you and Alpha playing it the other day, and I was just like, they're playing Dark Souls 2. It's spreading. It's spreading.
Game.
It's not. It's old, man. It's old.
Yeah, so is Dark Souls 1, which plays infinitely worse.
Oh no, it does not. Okay, I can't. I'm not gonna. I can't.
Omnidirectional rolling.
Okay, chat. Don't let him get away with saying Dark Souls 1 is. You can't even say a negative thing about Dark Souls 1 without people immediately trying to find your IP address.
Yeah, you can. Bed of Chaos.
You're old, Hal. Thank you, Bloody Show Music. Thank you.
I had to highlight.
I'm not even 30 yet, brother. I'm chill. It's relax. It's all good.
I'm 30. Youngins. Yeah, and I was saying before, if I had a spell I could cast, it would be a spell to cure all the smoke alarms in existence from making that little beep noise in the background to save us all from people recording videos without realizing they need to change the battery.
I would.
But yeah, so hashtag cast.
I would borrow a spell from a game called. Thank you, Ludi McShooty. I'm not old. I'm 25. Only Eli is younger than me. Thank you. But I would borrow a spell from the tabletop RPG Fatal, which if you don't know what it is, that means nothing. If you do know what it is, you're recoiling in fear because that is an abomination. But the spell I would borrow is known simply Perpetual Orgasm.
No.
You can probably guess what it does.
You wouldn't get anything done. God.
For all the people who came from.
No, it explicitly kills you.
Oh, it's like the thing. Was there an experiment with a rat with a button that was just there going, pressing it again and again and again until it died?
Yeah, it's pretty much that. Oh, I see Enclave knows Fatal.
Do you know what? I think the best spell I could think of. Well, the hashtag is hashtag cast for people listening. The one I could think of just to slightly mess with people would be you cast a spell and it has a zero. This certain object, if someone touches it, they have a 0.5% chance of immediate death. So, you know what I mean? You could theoretically still go about your day and if you really need to use it, but there's a slight chance immediately wordlessly fall down and die. We have 2 donations here by Danger Tickle. That's a great name, by the way. Thank you. Glad I can catch you fellas live. Also, idea for tier list. Places where you shit the hardest in Warhammer 40k and AOS and Overwatch. No, OW. Old World.
Overwatch.
That's a great idea. Lord Commissar Augustus Van Thula, love from Poland. Dzięki. Dziękuję. Thank you. Drunken Cow 13 says, since I'm 19, you'll accept and you're old. Yes,
I am very old.
So sorry.
I saw myself in the mirror earlier and I saw how many grey hairs I have in my beard. I'm like, it's over. It's over.
Before we that was hashtag cast, and we're going to get straight into today's topic, which is explaining magic / the magic system of the Warhammer verse. And to start with, there will be some Warhammer fantasy though. Oh, sorry, there's another. What has he said? Oh, so there was some background gameplay of me playing Darktide, and I'm terrible at it. So please be generous. I'm so unfortunate. I did play Psyker though.
Hell yeah.
Was it Psyker? Was the donation?
Zirconian Cube with the 2. Thank you. Marathi causes Colin to cast Ceaseless Discharge. What are they thinking when they named that boss?
Wow. So today we start with the Warhammer 40k magic, or Warhammer in general magic system, and it starts with the narrative. So how does magic affect the narrative of Warhammer? It's boiled down really simply to chaos. Basically, I think most of us do have heard of chaos, but for the uninitiated, chaos itself is a pantheon of 4 quote-unquote gods. They're kind of coalescences of ideas and things mashed in together, and they have basically their only objective is to really ruin humanity, and mostly they've already glucked 3,000 the Eldar into an almost nothing race, unfortunately. And chaos itself mostly is the antagonist for all of Warhammer. It's the perverse, like very much sort of close to like biblical terms of like, it's the devil, it's the corruptor, it's the entire thing that basically everyone was so like every other race or faction, like Necrons, possibly a little bit, but Eldar and humans, they come so close to achieving like a golden age of perfection, and then chaos comes in off the top rope and hits them with an RKO basically. So it mostly affects it in that way. We have a donation, I think it was another one by Joseph Pollard. Thank you, brother. He says, I knew you were degenerate, Colin, but why would you mention Fatal? The game only hardcore incels play. Damn.
It's because I don't know, shock value. Because the 5 people who know what that game is would recoil in fear, and that's what I was going for.
Truly. Yeah. So essentially, in the narrative, magic often acts as like a thing of, particularly in some stories. It's just the arch antagonist in most ways. It's the thing that either turns people into evil or it assists them in their evil. It's a very broad stroke, but that's essentially the role of what magic plays, particularly in fantasy as well. As we mentioned, a horrible name called the End Times, in which essentially the magic itself was either trying to save the world, and then it also kind of blew up the world. So pain. Next one is the combat of magic in Warhammer. Now this one's a fun one, but it's a little bit different in different verses, so Colin will explain it in fantasy. But in the 40k / 30k setting, a lot of it's called psychic magic. A lot of that is very much sort of similar. I will talk about it later, but like the Force in a way, where it's a lot of it is like mental. Particularly, like if people like see the example of on screen here, where they're playing like the Psyker role in the game Darktide. A lot of it is you can do like brain bursting, particularly. A lot of it is invasions of the mind. Particularly like when they have like combat Psykers, which are humans, they very much focus just on the mental stuff. And then when it gets to more powerful things, such as like Astartes or demons and all that stuff, they slightly move into more traditional forms of magic. Whereas like, so it's like our examples like Thousand Suns, where is like basically the Magic Legion. There'll be one of the antagonists in the game, Space Marine 2, and they can cast slightly more traditional spells, but in a way in which, particularly in Warhammer, like someone's brain, like their mental strength is very much linked to how much they can unleash in their combat magic. Again, I don't want to touch too much on traditional magic because it's very much a fancy thing. So Colin, if Colin wants to explain here, like the Warhammer fancy version of magic combat / magic itself.
I would be happy to. I've even just for some quick. I remembered I had this. the 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay book, you can play as a wizard, and there's some cool stuff in there. So on top of, I've got some stuff laid out in front of me, but I figured I remembered I have this. And I'm hoping this has a miscast table in it, because I know, at least from the older editions of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, when magic goes wrong, it's fun. So we'll talk about magic and hopefully talk about what happens when it goes very badly.
Warhammer 10th did get rid of the psychic phase in the actual tabletop game, just letting people know. So there's magic is now a shooting thing as of the time. Maybe 11th might be different. We don't know.
Mm-hmm. But, will you be taking us away, Hal, or shall I start with some?
You can go for it. Go for it. Just on Warhammer Fantasy Magic.
So Warhammer, just a quick overview before we talk about someone. We mentioned some rats earlier, but we'll talk about them. Just as a quick general guideline for how it works, it starts. All magic comes from. There are some exceptions, but it comes from the realm of chaos. It starts as dark magic, and then splits into the 8 different winds, which is Akshi, the red wind, lore of fire; Zir, the blue wind, lore of heavens; Kamon, the yellow wind, the lore of metal; Balthasar Gelt, my beloved; Gur, the brown wind, the lore of beasts; Gyron, the green wind, the lore of light; Heish, the white wind, the lore of light; Shyish, the purple wind, the lore of death, such as the power of Nagash; and Olgu, the gray wind, the lore of shadow. I think that's the Olesia and Vermintide actually uses the lore of shadow, if I remember correctly.
Mm.
It's as all things Warhammer, quite dangerous. When things go wrong, they go very wrong. But those are the main 8 winds. Dark elves and some evil factions like vampires can use just pure dark magic. Lizardmen, high elves, and wood elves can use high magic, which is you take all those different 8 winds, knit it back together into magic in its purest form, with the corruption removed, so you don't inherently endanger yourself more so than anything else when you're using magic. And then there's some other magic. Most noticeably for me anyways, rat magic, Skaven magic. It's
beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Everyone in the chat's just like, when's rats
are here. The fun thing about Skaven magic is that part of it, at least, it's kind of actually like paladins, which I know you do not think of a paladin when you think of a Skaven, but because it comes directly from the Great Horned Rat in a lot of cases. They've got their own spell lores. They've got the lore of ruin, which is what most of the Grey Seers use. There's also the lore of plague for Clan Eshin. There's the lore of, I'm forgetting the name, the lore of stealth. There we go. It's pretty easy. It's just what the Clan Eshin sorcerers use. And then there's the lore of the warp, which is, I believe, an older one. So not as much talked about, but it's another Grey Seer thing. It's magic is very dangerous in the best of times in Warhammer Fantasy. It carries, much like 40k, the constant little overhanging threat of, am I going to cast Fireball or am I going to cast Portal to Khorne's Realm on accident?
I just realized, the thing I said at the beginning where you can't, my spell would be 0.5% chance you die. That's literally what using warp magic essentially is.
Yeah, that's Warhammer magic. Although Skaven magic is more like a 10% chance because they just don't care. And they also enhance it with Warpstone, which is solidified chaos, basically. It's a drug, it's food, it's an energy source. Warpstone is whatever it needs to be at a given moment, as long as it's malicious. That's it.
A common theme we'll be coming up on is it's what the plot demands it. So that's essentially what's going to happen a lot here.
Which usually it's at least funny, so I don't mind it that much. Let's see. Skaven magic in particular, this is somewhat, a constant for all things, but especially for Skaven, because they do not know the meaning of subtlety or holding back. Even the longest trained elf, the most powerful of Slann, except maybe Lord Croak, he can't do any wrong, but everyone else, you cast it. It's coming from the realm of chaos, all magic, one way or another. So sometimes things go bad, especially if you're in a region where the winds of magic, because magic also just blows as a wind across Warhammer Fantasy. If the winds are blowing strong, your fireball is going to be real damn big. But in the best case scenario, it might be too big, and what was meant to just be like, I'm going to light a torch real quick is, oh, I lit the building on fire, and it's made out of stone, so it was real bad. Not something you want to mess around with. There's a reason that witch hunters in fantasy still hunt the witches. It's because the witches tend to make things blow up if they don't know what they're doing, if they're untrained. And even trained people are in for a bad time. Oh, lovely. I found the miscast table I was looking for.
Nice.
Skaven, because they, snort warpstone, you don't want to be in front of whatever they're casting. As I always mention, actually, we mentioned it last time we did one of the episodes on them. Thanquol wrestled one of the most powerful human mages on the planet, and the other guy was like, I'm not going to win this till some Gotrek, Felix, everyone else started helping, because Skaven magic is horrifying. Magic is all horrifying. Skaven magic, like I said, just ups the ante a little bit.
It's a car with no brakes.
Yeah, they cut the brakes on purpose because they don't care for who's in the car.
And it smells of cheese.
Quite.
Probably worse than that.
Very moldy cheese. It's also dangerous for those behind the Skaven wizard casting, because usually it goes wrong. Some miscast, like for example, I found the official tabletop war game miscast table, because there's an expanded one for the role-playing game, but it's still there in the base game. For example, there's the miscast result, Calamitous Detonation, which is you put a small round template over the wizard. Everyone the template is touching suffers a strength 10 hit.
Damn.
Including the wizard.
And they're Skaven as well, so that's like more than double there.
Yeah.
Oof.
This is, keep in mind, like, this happens to everyone. It's just, again, I think the Skaven can actually get penalties if they take Warpstone in Old World, or at least they did in Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Having not played OG Warhammer Fantasy Battles, I don't know the specifics of their casting there. But in lore, they're definitely doing that kind of stuff. There's also Dimensional Cascade, which is it's the same thing as before, only with a bigger template. And you roll a d6, and if you roll a 3 or lower, the wizard is, quote, cast into the realm of chaos. Remove them as a casualty. Magic
God.
Dangerous. It's, of course, incredibly useful. Like, you've got a Lore of Life wizard nearby, right? You're not dying. They're going to keep you going.
I must say, though, as like looking at magic in all settings, I do like how Warhammer has a cost, because you get some like even like Lord of the Rings, it's like Gandalf's a wizard and he's really strong. It's like, are there any drawbacks? Nah, he's just really overpowered. Whereas like I like how in Warhammer, both fantasy and 40k, it's like it's really powerful, but you might lose your soul, you might be eaten by demons, you might kill everyone you love. Just saying, it's good, but it has drawbacks, and that's
high consequences for poor magic use.
There's it's the same with rituals too. Like, rituals usually, like, you get all the incense, get everything you need. A little bit safer than on the fly. Like, oh, I'm getting attacked. I gotta cast, Spirit Leech or something from the Lore of Death. There's a Lore of Death. It's great. They're usually a bit safer. They can still go very wrong. For example, once again, our beloved Thanquol was doing a ritual to summon a Vermin Lord, the Skaven Greater Demon. He summoned a Greater Demon. Unfortunately, it was Scarbrand.
Yeah.
Which,
can we shout out to the new Skaven model?
So good.
As of current time recording, there's a new like Skaven Demon Prince-esque / Vermin Lord model. And that thing is gonna be my Mortarion for Death Guard. That will be my Mortarion if I can get the wings for it. Looting Mushuti, thanks for the $5, brother. He says, when is the slop tier list and why is there only 2 tiers? Marathian thankful. These people know us really well. It's almost frightening.
Yeah. Would you care for me to read some of these lovely miscasts? Because there's a minor and major miscast table.
Yes, please.
Go for it.
Yeah, the minor one, I think my favorite one is soured milk. All milk within 1d100 yards goes sour instantly. That's it. Soulquake, which sounds horrible, but you just fall over. You just trip. Soul wax, which is your ears clog instantly with a thick wax, which is not removed until someone else cleans them for you.
Okay.
With a heal skill, you also become deaf. Yes.
I was going to say, otherwise, that's actually could be quite profitable. Like, have you ever seen those YouTube videos of like the guys who just like clear ears out? They're like ear specialists, and like people watch them, they get like millions of views. You could like cast that again and again and just like clear it out, and then people are like, this is amusing. I don't get it, but it's a thing.
Mr. Milos has said in the chat, how would proxy Mortarian's model? Fat as L I've heard. No, listen, if you take that new Vermin Lord and you put Mortarian's wings on the back of that thing, are you telling me that's not the greatest thing that's been made?
That would be cool, but I'm not using that for Mortarian. I'm using that for a flying Vermin Lord.
I want to use Age of Sigmar models in 40k because we're getting Kotias at the moment and they're getting Vermin Lords. So let's be honest, who's winning?
There's Double Trouble, which is the effect of the spell you cast goes through and also occurs somewhere else within 1d10 miles. So I hope that wasn't a violent spell, otherwise some poor peasant's house is about to get obliterated.
Pain.
Those were all the minor ones. The major one, levitation. You fly. Except when the spell ends, you don't gently come to the ground. You are floating, and then you are falling. There's some hellish stench. You smell bad. This is a major miscast. That's interesting. You gain the distracting trait. Well, I would have to check that out, but apparently you smell so bad.
What's the spell called again?
Hellish stench. These are all miscasts I've been reading. None of these are spells. All of these are what happens when a spell goes wrong.
I'm sure there's a George Orwell quote where it's like, no matter how good a person is, people always dislike someone who smells. It's like, doesn't matter if you're really good. Like, now
I'm just thinking of the Magic the Gathering picture where like it's the rows of seats and then one seat's got a stain on it.
Oh no!
I'll read 2 more misfires real quick. Regurgitation.
We got a donation from Joseph. Oh, sorry. I was going
to
say we got a Joseph Pollard donation. Do not drink the milk at the Slaanesh Chaos Camp. It's not milk. Don't drink it.
Second to last major miscast. Regurgitation. You spew uncontrollably, throwing up far more foul-smelling vomit than your body can possibly contain, which lasts for 1d10 rounds. You can spend 10 rounds of combat vomiting.
Wow.
And then, from the other end, intestinal rebellion. Your bowels move uncontrollably and you soil yourself. Gain the fatigue condition, which cannot be removed until you change your clothes and clean yourself up.
Intestinal rebellion.
The Bowletariat. Jeez.
I'm so glad I remembered I have this.
That is very, very cool. Is that for Warhammer Fantasy Magic?
Those were all the miscast. There's the spells, and you'll notice like if you play Total War, it doesn't seem like each spell lore is too big. If you just go on like the Warhammer wiki or something, or if you have one of the fantasy roleplay books, if they have rules for magic, there's a lot of lores in each spell. Like the lore of metal alone has like 60. Some of which are useful, some of which maybe not so useful. some of which are great for causing an economic downturn. It's not all combat. It's just, it's Warhammer. We're here for the combat. So most of what we see is combat related. You can use magic in the setting for a lot of things. It's just, if you're casually using magic, you're kind of inviting trouble if you aren't either like a very powerful character, much like Gelt or someone else in the colleges of magic, or an elf who lives functionally forever, so you have time to practice. Same thing for the Slann. It's useful, and there's a reason ever since Teclis set up the colleges of magic, battle wizards are part of the Imperial army. It's just a mainstay. There's also a reason they still hunt the witch, because the witch can accidentally decide Nurgle is invading your town when they try and light their candles with a little snap of the fingers.
The smelly candles.
Yeah, there's maybe in the future we could go through each lore, but for now that's kind of Warhammer Fantasy Magic. It's got each its own unique flavor. The races all have their own things that can oftentimes come directly from their god rather than the traditional winds. And much like I'm sure we'll get to in 40K, probably not worth it to be a wizard. The convenience of being able to float is not worth the voices you're going to have in your head more often than not.
Yeah, and the socializing must be a pain.
If you play, so just on the screen for the audio listeners, there's some gameplay of Darkeye, which I got earlier. When you actually play the Psycho role on that, you actually hear like whispers and voices and stuff like that, just because when you're playing it, because the warp is telling you to invert your anus and submit to Nurgle, basically. Like, it's just
one quick thing before I pass it back over to you. It's there's nothing quite like blanks. Like, in Psykers, when they're around a blank, they're in actual physical and mental pain. There are things that dampen magic in fantasy. Like, if there's enough dwarfs around, you just can't cast a spell. Like, their presence is kind of like blanks. Obsidian also dampens blanks, which I did not know until relatively recently, or that dampens magic.
Huh.
It's like a dulling field, which is why there's even a test amongst like the best Imperial wizards to become the next chief of the colleges of magic. It's in the Obsidian Hall, because if you're running for that position, you're probably a very powerful wizard, and it would be best to keep that contained. Because it's
just like the idea that they prank each other. It's just like, oh, I got you a nice necklace, and they're like, oh, thank you, and they put it on the light. Makes me feel sick. Is there any obsidian in here? It's like, no.
Matthew Ford for $2 says, "Can you learn more than one lore?"
That's actually a good point. You can. That was actually
really
theoretically you can. It's just Max in the End Times, the wizard from Gottring and Felix. He just started throwing out lores left, right, and center because magic was going wild by that point. In normal case, he was also very competent, so he could handle it. Most wizards, you can, in theory, practice different lores. The problem is, like, elves were specifically designed, Slann were specifically designed by the old ones to handle magic in its entirety. Humans,
I believe your boy Balthazar Gelt, he did a second lore, didn't he?
Necromancy is weird. He did do that. Necromancy is like corrupted dark and magic.
It's more of Nagash, they call it. I think in games, Warhammer Total War.
I think it's just lore of vamp. Is it?
Was it lore of death?
No, lore of death is like just the lore of death, the wind of death. I think it's like lore of vampires. Lore of Nagash is kind of its own thing because he's Nagash, so he has the best versions naturally. You can do different lores. It's just the thing about the lores of magic. There'll be one oftentimes a human wizard is drawn to. Anyone in particular is just most prevalent for humans. Humans not being designed like the elves and Slann can't really like mentally and spiritually handle more than one lore, which is why Teclis's whole thing was he wasn't being rude. He's like, you physically cannot handle more than one lore. You don't live long enough. Your souls were not designed for it. Learn one lore, and that human can get very good at that one lore. Balthasar Gelt, again, probably knows the lore of metal better than any elf. you do not step out of that lore, because all like the incantations, all the preparations you need for one lore, different from another lore. So if you do mix and match, you're really playing with fire.
You know what it's like? It's like humans learn to drive automatic cars, and elves can drive a manual. So if you chuck a human into a manual, like they could theoretically do it, but like it's really difficult and it doesn't really work.
Yeah, kind of see what
not the best
for.
analogy.
I see what you're going for, though.
Maybe it's like you could be like lots of types of doctors. You could be an eye specialist, you could be a digestion specialist, or a limb specialist, a bone surgeon, blah blah blah. Like if you try to do everything, yeah. But if you want to specialize, that's where the money is, that's where the prestige is, that's where the innovation is as well, I suppose. So I don't want to be like
donation by incoming backup. Donation by incoming backup. Thank you, brother. It says in AOS, anti-magic causes stuff to stop existing because at its core, all matter is just materialized magic. It's kind of spooky.
Anti-magic's something in AOS. Yeah, the realms are just coalesced magic. So if you have a powerful enough like anti-magic rock,
DJB says, DJB says, I'm surprised Hal knows what a car is. Thought they still use horses in carriage where he is. I've never been in a
Now look here. Now look here.
Listen here, son. Okay, that was Warhammer, but a taster for Warhammer Fantasy Magic. There is a slight thing that links Fantasy and 40k and 30k together, which is how magic affects fate. It's kind of weird how in Warhammer Fantasy and 40k, magic is somewhat through like the acts of like chaos or prediction, or in a way like chaos itself is timeless because where they exist. I will go into the warp in a very short bit, but the source of where magic is in Warhammer very much does not follow time in the way in which the old world or AOS or really 40k does. So it kind of can interject in the future, past and present. It's kind of strange in that way. Fate is one of those awkward things in storytelling. I don't often like it when they do too much of like, oh, and then they like time travel thing. There are certain, I'm pretty sure in Warhammer Fantasy there are like some small time travel plots, and then in 40k there's quite a few of them, unfortunately. But fate generally, like, it's difficult because particularly when it's filtered through the idea of chaos, which is the antagonist for mankind and all of creation, really, they can see fate. A lot of demons, such as particularly ones who are favored of Tzeentch, which is the changer of ways, Mr. Blue guys, birds, Thousand Suns from Space Marine 2, if you're new, but those, they're corrupted by that kind of chaos god. They can see fate, but fate is never quite written in stone. It's very malleable. But essentially in Warhammer, fate is essentially often used as like a storytelling thing. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Again, it's very wildly, like, it's very loosely used.
You can see a fate, not the fate, a potential fate.
Yeah, that's a very good idea for it. Very good way of illustrating it. The next part is travel. It's not particularly in fantasy. There are the ideas of magic portals, particularly if you play Total War Warhammer. They do use like the Chaos Portal magic system, which is not that popular.
You would have to not play Immortal Empires to use that, and no one wants to do that.
Yeah, it's essentially almost the idea of like a wormhole, so kind of a slight bit of science. It's also a trope taken from other places as well. You can basically travel over incredibly long, or distances, and then appear somewhere within a short amount of time, or even in the weird case, particularly in Warhammer 40k or 30k, the warp itself, which I will go to in a second, but travel with magic is kind of messed up because you can either be attacked by creatures, demons, or other things during your travel. It's trying to get into your ships. It's trying to break your mind, essentially. Like, traveling in Warhammer is always dangerous. Sometimes ships also, due to how time doesn't really affect the source of magic, which is like the Chaos Realm, it very much, you could appear somewhere way earlier, like on schedule. Say if you're traveling somewhere, it's like, oh, it's 2 weeks and the warp, or 2 weeks of magic travel. It could take a week, or it could take 1,000 years. You could just get unlucky. But particularly the Imperium itself in Warhammer 40k, they often have they've worked out certain areas which are like much more stable, like quote unquote lanes of travel. But yeah, magic is often used to travel itself. And I will specify, it's not necessarily that the magic in 40k is used to travel, rather they travel through a massive ocean of it. There is some magic involved, which is the people who are operating like equipment and machinery, but it's very much like they're just dipping into like an ocean that's somewhere else. But the next section is
Wasn't there an Iron Hand from like 40k that ended up in 30k? Like Ferris saw his dead corpse and he was like, "What the hell did my kids turn into?"
Yeah, there's a short story where the Iron Hands come across a 40k ship in their time, and they're like, "This is like a distant future." They think it's like not that far in the future, but obviously it's like 10,000 years in the future. Iron Hand, they're like, "Oh wow, he's really augmented."
Yeah,
kind of scares them because they're like, "We're not meant to be that
degenerate." Like, this is disgusting. Little does he know, you can't stop that one.
Yeah, he won't get ahead of that. The next part is sources of power. So this is true for Warhammer Fantasy and 40k. It is the warp. But in Warhammer Fantasy, I don't know if they really call it the warp. They call it the realm of chaos. But it's essentially the same thing. The warp itself is an amalgamous ocean of thoughts, ideas, is a mirror dimension that mirrors our own material verse, but not in the sense like it's an exact copy. Rather, it just essentially, if it's in the fourth dimension, our universe aligns like sort of here on the left, and then it's on the right. It's like very much pretty close to getting through. And what exists in this warp / realm of chaos is creatures of thought and nightmare. Every good thought, bad thought, every hidden idea, concept. They are ripples in this ocean. They describe it as an ocean. It can have planets. It can have random places which are like just land. It makes no sense. The laws of physics don't apply to it in the same way. It's also where the chaos gods reside in both fantasy and 40k, and they essentially call it home. Their realms are twisted into their own sort of unique ideas and concepts that relate to each god. I can't give you a list of every single realm because we'll be here all night. But the next part is my favorite bit because it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's funneled by belief. So good and evil ripple, and they affect magic. So particularly within both, because it's a grim, dark, and grittier place, more evil thoughts are basically stronger and more prevalent. But the next part to explain is not basically the strength of magic is determined by belief in both series. And we begin with the orcs. Colin, would you like to explain orcs and colors?
Yes, of course. The funny orc magic is, it's kind of been all over the place in some ways. I know there's been moments in like canon where it's like, blank, for example, blanks can stop it, and it acts kind of like a traditional chaos magic. There's been other moments where blanks do nothing because it's orc funky business, so who knows. But one consistent thing is something that the orcs have to do with colors, because, again, kind of like I just said, the orc believe it to be true is something that's kind of been, you might agree, like back and forth. Some people are like, anything the orcs believe hard enough happens. Some people are like, there's limits to it. But to some extent, it is there because of the orc color system. If an orc paints something a certain color, it gets effects. It has a actual real property transmuted to it. I don't know if transmuted is the right word, but I can't think of a better one.
That's a good one. So yeah.
There's not too many colors. I know the big one people probably mostly know is purple, which I don't believe is an actual canon thing. It's just it was an in-joke at one point that completely took on a life of its own, that, purple is the stealth color, because you never seen a purple orc, have you? But
it's still my favorite, though.
I still love it, don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Without a doubt, someone cooked on that one. Someone cooked.
But aside from that, there's a couple different ones. For example, the color, I guess, shade. Is black a shade or a color? Whatever.
Shade.
Black. Yeah.
Isn't it like all colors combined or something like that? Isn't it with like lights?
Yeah.
It's like, isn't white the absence of color and then black is just all of them crammed together? Or is it the opposite?
We're law channel. We ain't.
Yeah,
we ain't
it's the color theory. But black is this is more so from fantasy. At least stuff like black orcs. It's you're dead hard. You're a tough orc. Like I said, purple is probably more fan stuff. Sneaky again, probably not canon. Don't think it is, but very fun. So,
the idea that they think they can't be seen if they put purple.
I love that.
It's just ridiculous because imagine Piton being like, "What do you mean? I can't see the entire army?" And there's just like, and then in reality, because the warp is like magic is affecting it, like there's an entire like wave of orcs, and they're all just like not trying to be their version of like quiet and stealthy, which is like not screaming but still running headlong, like an entrenched line. Ridiculous.
There's a oh no, pardon me. Where have you gone? Yellow is a explodey. You paint something yellow that's supposed to go boom, it'll go boom bigger. I believe it can also in some ways mean like wealth, and also in slightly other ways like also tough. Like the Mega Knob's got yellow. That means he's a real tough orc.
Yeah, and the bad moons as well have their flash kits and stuff where they're like, they've got all the money, they got all the teeth. It's like prosperity yellow.
Yeah, yellow is just in general. I guess bigger maybe too. It's like you bigger wealth, bigger loot pile, bigger armor, better stuff.
To be fair, I don't think they have good dental hygiene, so all their teeth must be like yellowy. So they're probably like teeth valuable, teeth yellow
valuable. Yeah. Red, of course, the red ones go faster.
The equivalent of the human racing stripe. Yeah. It's so brilliant. I love it.
And green, of course, is best.
It's the color of the gods. It's
exactly. It's the orcs. It's their gods. Green is best. Green good.
Shout out to Donkey Man USA in the chat who says, "I smoked the fungus booth." And immediately lost in some conversation there. I think my favorite part, I think I've told the story before, but the to explain how orc magic really works, say there's a group of orcs driving in a truck, and then the lead orc is, he's slamming that the gas pedal down, and he's like, and then the truck just starts spluttering and stopping. And then he turns to the other orc and goes, "I thought you filled it with gas." And basically because they run out of gas. And the other orc goes, "No, I know, I saw you did. We did fill it with gas." And all the orcs in the rest of the truck go, "Yeah, we saw you fill it with gas." And then the truck keeps on going because their belief has now made the truck sort of keep going because they think it's filled with gas. So,
the more comical stuff, like just you give an orc a lead pipe and tell him it's a gun and it just manufactures bullets. To some extent, that was kind of around older lore. They've definitely moved away from it. But like you sum it up perfectly with that, Hal. It's like it's still there, just more muted. Like it's less, I told that, like, what is it? I told an orc the floor was lava, but he didn't melt, so now he's immune to fire. That kind of stuff doesn't really happen anymore. But the little boost, like, hey, this clip, you tell the orc, the magazine has 30 bullets in it, but it's only got 10. It'll have 30 now.
Shout out to the best part, which is I don't know if this is a canon part or not. It's the world where the Imperial Guard ran out of ammo. And so
I don't think it's true, but it is funny if it's.
It's not be canon, but it could be. Which is I'll tell you one canon story, which is with Caiaphas Cain, the laughable clown commissar. Oh, do have a donation by Louis 1945. Thank you, brother. He says currently sipping on an oil margarita. Damn. Crude, like crude oil. I don't know. But
thank you.
Actually, Caiaphas Cain they were fighting orcs, and then he told all of the other troops, the humans, to like put down their guns, and the orcs didn't know what to do because they basically believe that their whole belief system is like they had to fight the hardest thing, the hardest thing there, and the humans stopped fighting them, so they started fighting each other. I always like that bit. So they managed to beat the orcs by just not fighting them. The one I love particularly is the humans ran out of ammo, so they just basically lifted their guns and just shouted bang, like going bang, 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 bang. And the orcs believed they were being shot, so then they died. And then there were people who were like they basically formed a testudo and started rolling forward, and they said like they're making the noises of like a truck and like a tank. So they're going chugga, 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 and they're like going boom, or something like that. And then the orcs died because they believed they were being attacked by a tank. It's most likely not canon, but it's hilarious.
It does remind me of the new Flash Gits animation with definitely not Bluey with the broccoli just go pop, 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 and because they believe it, all the furries die in the Black Templars. Like, you're all right actually. But there was Mikhailovich mentioned earlier, like about the idea of a colorblind orc. I feel like that would be a fun story where you could have a really overpowered orc. Where he's just like, he can't tell the difference between the colors, and he's just like, that looks red to me. And you could have like a really powerful guy. That'd be quite fun.
Everyone else believes he's faster, so he's faster, but he believes he's luckier, so he's just nothing ever goes wrong for him.
Exactly.
Or if they believe one of the bosses is the hardest git ever, and so therefore he gets stronger. Ridiculous. But the next part is to do with continuing on with sources of power. Is kind of how it's channeled. Is we mentioned a bit earlier. It's basically through psykers and mages. Mages being the Warhammer Fantasy equivalent. They don't really use the term psykers, but essentially there are people who are born with everything that is alive somewhat has a connection to the warp or the realm of chaos. It's just generally like it's like the spark of life somewhat within each thing, and basically like the ones who have a slightly stronger connection are the ones who are able to channel it to a like higher degree, and they are basically called psykers and mages. They are the poor bastards who are cursed with essentially having a ticking time bomb of power on them all times. The next part of sources of power, which is really, I like this one, which is science, because science in Warhammer is somewhat treated like a magic because it doesn't really follow actual science. And there are two factions that do this. One of them is the Necrons. Necrons, I will call it science just for terms speaking, but it's treated like a magic. It pretty much is cast like basically the most efficient and the most like incredibly powerful magic form within the Warhammer verse. It's just like there's not as many Necrons who are able to particularly use it. They have things like time magic. They have like crypto. Chronomancers, and who says the space clap? Lol. Well,
I don't know how. I've just realized that one of the people in your game you have for the background footage is named Dogfart.
Oh yeah. Hey, leave Dogfart alone. He saved my life like 3 times. Because I haven't played this game in like a year, so I was holding on for a hero. Where was that? Yeah. So Necron science. They have certain things where it's kind of overpowered a lot of the time. They even have a device where I believe it's Illuminor Xeras has it, where essentially it's a recreation of the galaxy, and if he actually like puts a finger in it, it like would detonate stars and things like that. They have their science is on an ungodly level tier. Examples like Trazyn the Infinite, who is the funniest again version, like City Clown in the Necron race. He's able to have an entire museum planet that is sort of like powered by a dead star god, or a shard of a star god, which has like museum pieces that are like each frozen in time. Like the scale of Necron magic is ridiculous. Their power sources are again, they have like things like necrodermis, which is what their bodies are made of, like a self-healing metal, which is not a thing. It's like an organic metal. Yeah, like again, like is not a real thing. Like Mike the Bretonian Groundlight, poor comments. He says all hell Dogfart. Listen, Dogfart's a real one. Okay, he made me finish. No, never mind. So Necron science is pretty incredible. Especially on the tabletop version of it, they have like different abilities. Most of it is kind of related to healing or buffs in that sort of way. A lot of it is to do with time. They are basically the rules of time because they don't really age. But basically, now we move on to the next part of science magic, which is the kid that wishes it could be Necron magic. This is Skaven science. Skaven science is basically what Necron science is, but it was in a mental asylum for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then it came out, the other side changed. Skaven science pretty much is whatever the Skaven really need to achieve, this thing does it. Like, their magic is like seen as unreliable. Their science is even more unreliable. So it's pretty horrible. You know, everyone, Colin wants to go into it a little bit.
Yeah, one thing that doesn't help is like a lot of their quote unquote science is using warpstone as a power source, which again, warpstone is solidified chaos. So they're hoping the essence of change and magic incarnate is going to be a stable and reliable power source, which it's certainly a power source. Stable and reliable, it is not. This is on top of the fact that, let's just ignore warpstone very briefly. A good 50% of Skaven research is stealing something from someone else without actually understanding how it works. So they'll take they'll take a dwarf gun. They don't get why it works. They know it works, and then they'll try and very crudely copy it, and then probably jam warpstone in it for fun because that's just what they do. And it'll shoot. Like rattling guns, they're damn dangerous. You don't want to be caught in front of one. You probably also don't want to be holding it or behind it because there's a pretty good chance it's also going to blow up. Same with like their warp fire cannons. You don't want to get hit by one of those because it's an energy beam. It's like a fucking Halo like Wraith blast.
Is there like a thing with warp weapons where they give radiation off? Because I could imagine the Skaven being like, "Oh, this is great. Oh, I'm feeling ill," and then they die, and then another Skaven goes, "Oh, free gun," and they just pick it up and just keep going and going and going.
Their Skaven are somewhat resistant to warpstone, certainly a lot more than anyone else. Not completely immune, because you can still mess them up, but they can eat it and not start melting or mutating. Like you need a lot of warpstone for a Skaven like to mutate or anything. They're not immune to when it blows up, because that's just an explosion. So, which again, like you can overcharging. I love it. It's such a fun tabletop mechanic. Like you can overcharge, your warp lightning cannon. It's gonna hurt whatever it hits. It's also quite likely that it's going to blow up and not be usable because it's just blown up. Like you removed from the tabletop because it just took too many wounds.
Wayne with a new Law Criminal member. Thank you, Wayne. Also, Bushido Do Funk, which is a great name. He says, "Love your I'm a lurk and work."
Feel free. Welcome to the lurk. It's not great. There's also other lovely Skaven science. So we have warpstone as the basis for a lot of it. We have stealing stuff as the basis for a lot of it. The Skaven also will just kind of throw Skaven slaves at a promising invention. Promising.
They're quite what's the word, like ingenuity? Like they're quite clever, to be honest, because they will really go for anything.
They will
They made spaceships. They've made nuclear bombs. They've made. I just love the fact that the Doom wheel exists, which is literally like a functional. I don't know what the equivalent is, but
hamster wheel murder machine.
Hamster wheel murder machine that I don't really put together as a hamster wheel.
Or the SAR tank, if you've ever seen that masterpiece of post World War I Russian engineering.
Or it's like with Clan Mulder, where like their version of like magical science is the flesh smiths of Mulder, where they basically sew together rats and beasts and then chuck warpstone down its gut.
They're Dark Eldar homunculi, if with somehow even less ethics. It's
the Dark Eldar crossed the line. The Skaven are not aware of the concept of a line.
Yeah, the Skaven weren't aware there was a line to begin with. Like you said, they're pretty clever. Although, honestly, for all that, the cleverness and somewhat actual intelligence does go into things like, Ica Claws, nukes, and doom wheels and stuff. It's also because they throw rats at the problem. So say experiment 1, the thing exploded, 100 rats died. Experiment 2, the thing exploded, 99 rats died.
Success.
We're making progress. And
sorry, you go.
So once you get it down to a reasonable number of exploded rats, which very, very important to note, is not 0 dead rats. It's more like, like a Rattling gun explodes and it takes out 3 or 4 rats. It was a machine gun until then. That's acceptable.
It's like if you were to do a mission to the moon with Skaven, they wouldn't. It's not just that they'd launch the rocket, it blows up, launch rockets. It's that there's also Skaven eating the other crew members who are assigned to the ship. They're also not spending any time into, we've got to make sure it's safe. And there's also the people, it's just like, in some ways, it's like, yes, the problem will be getting done quicker, but also there are other problems being done at the base level. And it's like, even I was thinking of like Chernobyl, where they were like, oh, in real life, the Russians had to like scoop bits of radioactive concrete off the roof of one of the parts of Chernobyl. And they were only up there for like 2 minutes before they had to come down. If it was Skavens, just be like, nah, just go in. And then when you die, we'll just push you into the hole. And then we'll be done in like 2 hours.
Yeah. It's and because Warpstone is at the core of all of it, it's all very magical, which is partially why it keeps going wrong, because Warpstone is explosive and also corruptive and also unstable and a whole lot of negative adjectives that make every other race rarely, if ever, want to interact with it. But the Skaven are like, yes, give me more of this.
Skaven magic is very, very cool. Skaven science in air quotes.
Skaven science and magic are both intertwined and not something you want to mess with. You had almost full health. Why did you just take from that Medicaid station?
I mean, I had to. Like,
you get in the elevator.
Yeah, you might as well. But the next part of explaining certain sources of power, it's the last one. It's a small thing. It's kind of niche at the moment, but it may be bigger in Warhammer, which is something called Enuncia. It's basically, it's like a universe-shaping language. Just when someone speaks Enuncia, there's like these certain words. I theorize it possibly comes from the old ones in some capacity. It basically can physically alter the universe, but it's not actually from the warp. It doesn't. It's something people use to fight against the warp. It's often used at some points in the Horrors Heresy and in 40k at certain points. It's very rare. I think only Dan Abnett, the author, is really touching on that for the moment. The next part is scale of complexity. This is a small part, just to kind of explain the basics of it. This one is just specific to Warhammer 40k. The basic part is basically just telepathy and telekinesis, like on the ground level. It's like mental gymnastics, essentially. The basic form is often like astropathic choirs of people sending messages across long distances, or things like, again, like it's a small thing, but like navigators who have like a special eye who are able to look into the warp. Like very, like that's like the low down version of it. Fantasy is doesn't really take on the more mental aspect as much, and fantasy is a bit more like, again, like a bit more traditional, what you think of magic when it comes up. The next slightly higher part of complexity is the fact that rituals exist. This is true for Warhammer Fantasy and 40k. Because of the way like belief affects the universe, as we said earlier with like the orcs, rituals have a certain thing where it doesn't require a huge amount of belief, but there are certain things where the universe itself has established rules that, in general, if you enact a ritual in a certain way and make the appropriate sacrifices, chaos will basically reward it, and something will answer it. And he can even do it against his own will at times, so people can summon demons that do not want to be summoned, because of the fact that the ritual somewhat works with the magic. Up to the highest level of complexity, which is the fact that demons and creatures and other things of magic, they represent concepts. So, and I was trying to think of a good example of this one, but the one that popped to my mind was when, spoiler alert for people who haven't read stuff for Horrors Heresy about the character Garvia Loken. If you don't want to know, mute yourself for about a minute. Garvia Loken gets it right at the end. He dies, unfortunately, right at the end of the last book of the Siege of Terror. And his death, the fact, like, the idea of it being such a betrayal, the concept of betrayal goes on to form the demon called Samus, which is the very first demon that they encounter in the first book, Horus Rising, the first Horus Heresy book, which then basically starts off the Horus Heresy. So certain concepts can create demon, like a great devastation will create like a demon or a thing related to a certain catastrophe.
Although speaking of rituals as well, even the Ruin Storm, the massive warp storm that Erebus summoned during the betrayal of Calth, he did that by he gathered like gene seed and pieces from Istvan 3. So when Istvan 5, he went, I'm gonna like rummage through all the dead loyalists for like, oh, here's the like head of a Raven Guard who was shot in the back. Oh, here's like an Iron Hand who was told his Primarch's boring. Oh, here's a Salamander who was called a bad guy. And he just found all the like the things that like were infused with the most emotional trauma and suffering and dismay to help fuel the summoning of the Ruin Storm. And he went to Calth and he went to like sat under the moon. He went, humana, and then he just summoned it. And it's that whole thing of like certain events in the setting imbue like talismans with power, and that can be harnessed. And that also is true for like demons and even living saints, like not even bad things, sometimes good things like living saints, and even the Tau deity that lives, that's like the Tau god of like the greater good. It's like a conglomeration of all the different races that are like helper species, and it's like what you get in is what you get out. And so ritual are just kind of like a force multiplier in that regard.
There is an example slightly of this, which is in Warhammer Fantasy, which is the resurrection of Nagash the last time, where the Everchild, I believe that is Colin, which is the daughter of Tyrion and Alariel, the Everqueen.
Yeah,
she represented the idea of like a pure soul. And that was an ingredient needed to resurrect Nagash with magic.
She Aliathra did not have a pleasant ending.
Yeah.
Of course, neither did Volkmar.
Neither did who's our Batman? The Grim.
Eltharion.
Oh, I hate to bring it up. It's so painful. It's like that's the equivalent of like the Loken death for me, like in fantasy. That's like, no, not him. No, so painful. So that's the highest end of like scale of complexity. Almost done here. Just finishing up with the last few things, which is the inspiration / tropes of Warhammer. As you can tell, if you probably haven't noticed yet, Warhammer's kind of copied someone else's homework a few times.
A couple someone else's.
A few times.
Dune, Tolkien, never heard of him.
Yeah. So the more basic one is they basically copy the Force in terms of like in 40k, with how it's like the Force, but like a really dark version of it, where it's not the dark side of the Force. It's just like it's the Force, but it has massive like downscaling problems and side effects.
How many metachlorians does Tiberius have, or Mephiston? They're off the charts.
Too many.
Over 9,000.
That wasn't a good add to the series, I won't lie. I didn't like that. But yeah, so I mean, the idea of telekinesis is kind of everything that has telekinesis is somewhat a ripoff of Star Wars The Force. The traditional magic of Dungeons and Dragons, the sort of expansion of what was Lord of the Rings magic, was what the foundation of Warhammer Fantasy was, because obviously Games Workshop itself being a company that did make D&D stuff originally and then wanted to make their own stuff to sell more product, they kind of just made their own D&D world for Warhammer Fantasy. And the last one is Dune, because if everyone hasn't seen Dune Part 1 and 2, go see the movies, they're really good. The idea of particularly the more larger scale things about like fate itself, time, understanding of the world, is a lot of that is ripped off from Dune. The actual God Emperor is taken from Dune, although in the Dune one he is a worm. I'm not getting into it. It's just too much. And the last section here is rules and limitations and flaws, which is kind of thing that makes magic the more interesting part. The limitation to magic is, first of all, the use of it. If you use too much of it, you will inevitably turn to a bubbling, like writhing mass of flesh and basically a spawn of chaos and terrible fate, or you get sucked into the warp. But
those are both possible.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So that happens in both all three settings, really. Fantasy, AOS, 40k. If you overdo it, you are probably going to turn into a gribbly thing.
Yeah, so your body can the power of change itself ripples through you and you die. There is a limitation to warp powers, which is a barrier that separates real space from the warp. So when things want to incur from the warp, they take like a massive debuff. So if you were to fight, say, a demon in the warp, you would lose no matter what, because it's basically an unlimited supply of magic. So when they say like the chaos gods are fighting each other in the warp, most of the time it's like the great game. Those battles are nothing compared, real space battles are nothing compared to those ones. But when they want to cross over,
sorry, I was going to say, isn't there like a bit in the Devastation of Baal where Mephiston is fighting in the realm of chaos Kabanda to like stop Kabanda getting to Baal? But if he gets there, we're screwed. And he's just like, I'm really powerful. This is not going very well. Poor guy.
Yeah, he doesn't. He delays him for like 5 minutes. Doesn't stand a chance. But when demons like particularly want to cross over or other things, they want to bring power from the warp, it's massive. Again, like it's massively less powerful than what it would be in the warp itself. It is like fire in a way, like you're bringing fire from a massive pot of fire into a place where it's like oxygen deficient. It's really like struggles, and particularly like they have to use like rituals and other things. Like they have to use other things to maintain the magic, because the magic itself just sort of wants to dissipate. Kind of is like convection basically. It basically wants to spread out and dissipate all over the material verse. There is a concept as well, which is the limitation for demons, particularly, which is the idea of true names. So I think it's in fantasy, but not often used as much. But in 40k particularly, when something becomes a demon, it just gets like the core identity of its being is stamped with like a name. So particularly the chapter of Grey Knights, the big magic fighting all Psyker, Emperor's Gene Seed brothers, they often align their own name to a name of like the true name of a demon. So they're uniquely skilled at fighting that particular demon.
And they draw like I think there's also like an element of prestige where the most promising students are given titles of like particularly powerful demons and entities. So they're like, you're going somewhere, have this, so you can draw a bit more extra juice from that part of their name,
Yeah, so it acts like an anti thing. Example as well, like people, if someone knows someone's true name, they can take control of the demon. It's not as seemingly as it's not as easy just saying it and then you're done. The example is there's a word bearer called Zardu Layak who basically knew the true name of Fulgrim, and it almost broke his mind, and he was prepared for it, and he was a psycho and everything. But like the idea of speaking a demon's true name, particularly like a demon primarch, was just unbearably painful and soul rending. Like it forever would taint him, like in a way. There are also side effects on the slightly lower level, which is just being a navigator. If the idea of the concept of navigators, they have the third eye on their head, so they would like sort of guide ships through the warp, because they're able to like look at the warp tides with their third eye. Just being a navigator, eventually you do turn into like a grueling mess of a thing, because whoever stares into the abyss long enough, the abyss stares back into you. It's very much that.
And never get into a staring competition with a navigator. It's not going to go well.
Yeah, even just coming into contact with unbridled like warp magic, as people have seen the example illustrated, which is Darktide, it just makes people corrupted. Like their flesh just ripples with change and pus, poison, or like sleekness or blood. Like it just gets ruined to the level where chaos itself is just a pollution in some regard. It can pollute people on a sort of low, like a physical level, and then also pollutes your soul just interacting with it, unless you are trained, like particularly as I said earlier, like things like Psykers. And the other limit, as Colin did mention earlier, which is blanks. People who basically, there's something wrong with these people. These people blow up the bathroom at Denny's and don't let the workers know you did it. These people, they are innately born. It's like less than 1 in a million even of them, and they're innately born with the ability to essentially be a dulling effect to the magic of the warp around them. It's very hard to kind of, they haven't really explained exactly how that's possible. I don't really know if there should be a how thing, because they often say like, the warp is in everything or whatever. It might just be like they're born with like a negative effect of it, but it's still magic in some kind of way, or it's simply they are born without it and they have a nullifying effect on it.
Because there's like the pariah gene, and isn't there like a thing where maybe the Necrons are involved because the Necrons wanted to fight the Eldar, and that's like a hold off from like, oh, we wanted an anti-Eldar thing.
It's not as around anymore. I know, like when the Dawn of War, like 1 was coming out, like one of the Necrons, like leader character, I think his name was like Thomas Maccabee or something. Like he was a pariah.
Yeah,
kind of moved away from it, which is the good and the bad.
It was cool while it lasted, but essentially, people who are like blanks or things that are blanks, they're able to have like a negative effect, and it essentially magic dies when it's around it. Particularly, I think recently, because obviously I read and made stuff on the Eisenhorn. There's a character called Beckwin in it who's part of a new novel series, probably one of the most exciting things going on in Warhammer in terms of book series coming out. And Beckwin is a blank, and she wonders why everyone like hates her in her life, and it's because she puts out such a negative effect that people feel uncomfortable around her. Like it's like someone who, I think the character as well from the Kaifas K novels, Jurgen, my beloved Mr. Baldric from Blackadder. My man, his version of it is he puts out he basically smells like old
real bad.
And, like bad cheese.
You got the stank.
My man's stanky. But that's the effect he has around things. It can disrupt. Yeah, it can disrupt. Like they're around certain Psykers, as Colin mentioned like way earlier. They experience extreme pain because essentially it's like being somewhat fried or like being tortured low-key, just being in their presences. Poor Eisenhorn, who his love interest is Beckwin, and he can't even be near her or touch her.
Pretty much the only people who can stand them is custodians, and they're just like, this is like, I'm kind of annoyed by this person's presence, but it's okay. And they're like the only ones who can handle them at like long intervals. But
yeah, so blanks are a cool addition. There is something as well, which I think Colin mentioned, Obsidian, which the equivalent on Warhammer 40k side is called Blackstone, which essentially is a current thing in the prior Nexus campaign, where it's like a mysterious ancient like stone, like literally a black stone, which is meant to be like similar to obsidian, and it has properties such as it can either amplify or dampen warp like magic. So particularly the Imperium right now wants to create things with it. The pylons of Cadia, which were containing parts of the Eye of Terror, like warp things and massive warp tears in reality, they're often shrunk down by pylons created by the Necrons. And there are potentially things which are the Black Star fortresses, which are also kind of made from black stone. The Blackstone fortresses are made from black stone, and they are like seemingly like an ancient Eldari creation. It's a relic from an old era pastime, such as like the War in Heaven.
Speaking of Eldar, one of the characters in this game is Isha.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't know how. I don't think I only died in the first game I did because I got absolutely beamed by like one heavy attack, got up, and then I got beamed by a sniper. But I did all right. Playing Psycho is fun, particularly playing Dark Tide on like the missions where it's all dark, like it's pitch black mode. That's particularly exciting. But yeah. So that's most like the limitations on powers as well, and also just maybe one thing which is, as I mentioned, like with the barrier between the warp and real space, sometimes like if the sacrifice as ritual on the material versus end is not enough, it just doesn't work. It does not really explain like why, why is this a set? Like again, like you're not meant to think it. You're not meant to think about it that hard. It's just it didn't like this is what it requires. You didn't meet there. This is the limitation of and obviously bigger things. Bringing in a demon prince requires greater sacrifice and greater power, and things that don't do that, it just basically goes wrong. And we finish off with the last part, which is if anyone here wants to think about some cool lore moments with psychic powers, I did have one off the cuff, which was from Horus Heresy, when all the World Eaters, the only ones who don't have the Butcher's nails left are the World Eater Psykers. They're kind of outcast. Basically no one likes them in the Legion because they're like, oh, you're not, you didn't get the tattoo, brothers. You're not in the club.
Fair, even in modern 40k, it's not even that, like, sometimes Battle Brothers don't necessarily like librarians, but they're so different. They tend to be quite antisocial with them. They're just like, oh, like even Tigurius, they're like, he's kind of weird. I respect him, but I don't want to be his friend. And you're like, oh, and there's like, I always think the image of them like in the cafeteria, all the Battle Brothers in groups, and they're just the librarian, just like, oh,
he's reading. He's fine. He's reading in the corner. But so a cool moment from the lore was basically when they're trying to save their Primarch Angron from basically dying from the Butcher's nails, because his ones are slightly worse than the poorly copied Imperial ones that are in the rest of the World Eaters. The Psykers essentially combine themselves like mentally into one psychic being in the warp, and they basically act like their own kind of psychic Primarch, and they essentially calm Angron down. But then, Angron, because the trade-off, some of them, every time they do this, quite a few of them die, to the point where at the end, all of them die because it costs too much to actually enact the ritual. Another cool one I thought of, which was my overpowered Mephiston, my chief librarian of the Blood Angels. In book 3, the man is able to, in the middle of like a aircraft, stop time and simply watch a pilot's head explode, and he thinks about it. He has time to like ponder if he should put it back together or not. Ridiculously overpowered, this guy. And then the last part in that book where they're fighting Thousand Suns, and he goes, there's not enough of me. I need to go Super Saiyan. So he splits his being into 3 parts. He sends his mental mind into like basically another librarian to basically start playing chess and directing all the other pieces. He leaves his body holding this like burning ritual site, like cooling it down with his body essentially, right, and using his Space Marine genetics to like sort of semi-heal himself while he's doing it. And then he sends his soul into the warp to go chase a greater demon. So there's kind of like weird stuff like that. No one else can do that because no one else is as powerful as him.
He's basically 40k's version of Doctor Strange. He's like, I'm going to have like a psychic fight over here, and then my physical body's going through surgery. Like, yeah, Mephiston, you do what you like. You're crazy.
And then it's not really like a super cool, like necessarily like magical moment, but when Chief Librarian Tigurius of the Ultramarines made contact with the hive mind of the Tyranids, which is basically, it is classed as like a psychic, like magical mind, but it's not of the warp. That's actually probably a thing I did miss, which is like the Tyranids itself, its hive mind is a magical thing in universe, to the point where it actually has the emotion spite, which is quite funny because it hates Blood Angels. He made a connection with the hive mind, the enormity of like a human being withstanding the might of a being that immense is pretty like, you need like so much more lore behind that to actually understand like how ridiculous that was. I don't know if there's any Warhammer fancy one particularly, like maybe with Max Shriver, he's might have done something ridiculous, that guy.
He's fought very impressive people, although like you said, he dueled Thanquol. As much crap as we give Skaven wizards, Thanquol is not the kind of wizard you want to be on the other end of his spells. You're not winning that fight. That being said, my favorite moment of his, just for how magic can work and just go very wrong, is that he found a cursed artifact that a vampire was hunting with like intense fervor, and he started looking at this artifact, and it was like covered in layers and layers and layers of defenses, and he spent like hours just like peeling them back bit by bit. Like, all right, I gotta know what this thing is. This is very important to both like our current situation. It's also just clearly a powerful artifact. Don't know what it quite is yet, but it's important. And then he peeled the final layer of the defenses away, and then he found a fragment of a scrap of Nagash's consciousness staring back at him, and he just on the spot like dipped out of the ritual, like just was like, I'm done, I'm out, and then passed out from both fear and being overwhelmed by Nagash's presence.
Poor soiled himself.
wouldn't surprise me. Which is just I like you can find those artifacts in 40k and Warhammer alike, where like there's some intensely powerful magic artifact. You shouldn't mess with it. It's probably not worth it. You might accidentally find out, oh, this is a sliver of corn, or like poor Max, oh, this is Nagash.
Bro found like a toenail clipping of Nagash and was like, I'm out. Nope, that's some bad stuff.
That toenail clipping probably raises the dead in a 3-mile radius around it. So I would want it.
Grow. He's going to really grow from it, my lord. Those are, I mean, the Warhammer Fantasy one I thought of, which is the Vortex, which is in the middle of the Warhammer Fantasy world. The Calador Dragon Tamer. That one? He managed to gather a lot of the ancient elite high elves in together, and they created a warp vortex portal right in the middle of the donut of Ulthuan, their continent, and essentially it siphons off the magic of the warp from the two poles, which is where like in the Warhammer Fantasy verse, that's where like the magic comes from. That's where chaos is essentially. That's where the gate of chaos was, where the old ones were, and it just boom. That's where they come from, like demons and all that crap come from there. And they siphon off the power of the realm of chaos itself into a portal that then does it then spit it back out at like cleansed power?
I think it does a couple different things. Well. Like for example, like Sigmar was trapped in it ever since his ascension to godhood. Like Tzeentch threw him in it, which it holds some amount of magic because between the faith in Sigmar people had and just this ambient magic, the vortex, he ascended to true godhood. It also it does spit it out. Some of it it just gets rid of it. I think in some iterations, don't know where it goes. It's just gone. So in some cases it just deletes it. It can also it cycles back to the realm of chaos. It does that because if there's too much ambient magic in the world, demons just can show up at will, which you do not want.
And the high elves that are currently in the middle of it, they're locked in the enchantment, aren't they? They are just constantly locked in enchanting for all time. Well, until the thing
vortex
unravels.
Yeah. They most of the elf mages except for Calador are I think it's just they're trapped in magical amber. You ever see those mosquitoes from dinosaur time? They're like that, just constantly keeping it going. Calador sits a little bit outside of that just to make sure no one messes with them. Which there was a funny moment when the high elves and the dark elves first split, because Malekith and Morathi threw a hissy fit and unbound the vortex, which worked, except it also unbound all the incredibly powerful kick-ass elf mages inside of it. So they just blew them up and then reformed the vortex.
What do they do? What happens to Calador Dragon Tamer at the end times then?
Teclis's plan gets to bind the winds of magic using the vortex as to help. Went wrong after Morathi went a little bit insane and undid it. Not helped by Tyrion pulling the Sword of Cain and all that crap going on there. Calador, for his part, when Morathi tried to flee, basically just put armbarred her or something, put her in a full Nelson. It was I'm going. We might be going to Slaanesh together, but you're coming with me. And he just let himself be dragged into Slaanesh's gut so that Morathi would go down with him.
Eesh.
My boy. And then
like a hero.
An extra thing probably then to add on to fantasy, which is parts of the actual magic of the world could be thrust into the different colleges concept and then bound into people as avatars of those ideas. So that's kind of a cool thing. It's if everyone here's watched Avatar: Last Airbender, it'll be someone becoming I am the earthbending, the god of earthbending in one person.
So it's actually kind of cool because for the Supreme Patriarch, when they decide a new one, whichever college's lore wins, that lore actually becomes ascendant in Altdorf. The lore of fire was the guy before Gelt, so fire magic flowed through Altdorf more strongly. When Gelt won, it switched to metal, which I thought was cool. You can actually fairly easily affect how magic works if you put enough effort into it.
That's what it reminds me of, the Navigator houses in Warhammer 40k.
Yeah.
Whichever one becomes the Grand Navigator, their progeny become
they're juiced up, aren't they?
They resist and they can see through the warp better.
Yeah.
But they often only have minor houses become the Grand Navigator because they keep getting. If any of the big houses took it, they would assassinate them. So they often like have the minor houses. So the minor houses are able to like rise.
Except for like House Belisarius, it's like, oh, who's guarding you? Space Wolves.
The Space
really?
Wolves.
Like, yeah, we've just got we have a few on retainer because we're that important. It's like, shit. Okay,
please
we're not
come try and assassinate me, please.
This one guy either side just growling, just going, like, nope, I'm all right. It's fine.
I did actually have 3 quick things I wanted to add. Hell, just to magic.
Yeah.
One is a very quick one because I found from old Warhammer fantasy roleplay a very fun miscast again. I'll just read this one verbatim. While you sleep, your genitals decide to leave you and run off north to the realm of chaos. In their place, you are granted a toothed orifice, which stage whispers lewd suggestions at inappropriate moments. Thank you, Games Workshop.
Who wrote that?
I don't know.
We need to
Sick MFs.
We need to contact the authorities and be like, arrest this man or woman, arrest whoever did this.
That is a real possibility of magic in Warhammer Fantasy. Your balls might decide to leave
and become tiki chompers.
Yep. The other 2 things are actual like notification notices. Divine magic is a bit different, kind of like I was saying. Like Skaven are kind of like paladins. Theirs is a bit different though because their god is an asshole. Like Elven, this is I at least from what I've seen and theorize whatever seems to be pretty equal in 40k and fantasy, which is that praying to a god like the Emperor or Sigmar or Assyrian definitely gives you magical powers and stuff, but it's not like Psyker powers or using one of the lores of magic. It doesn't tend to like, it's safer in general. Like you're praying to Sigmar and they're intercessing, so it's more reliable, if that makes sense. Like the Sisters of Battle stuff, like their prayers in the Emperor don't misfire, right?
Like faith magic seems like it subverts the go wrong part of it because the belief is absolute. So
although that being said, I'm not sure. I'm sure it's true to some extent for 40k. I don't know how much, but again, in Warhammer Fantasy, it absolutely is, especially in the role play. You can pray to Sigmar. If you mess up the prayer, it might still be answered. Sigmar might not be the guy picking up the phone. That might be Zinch.
Thank you, Tom Warren, for the $2. Says I don't think magic is worth it with the risk. True.
Yeah. And then I get the last thing I notice is that fantasy, it seems to be a little bit safer to be a wizard than in 40k, or at least there's a lot more ways to deal with it if it goes wrong, like a psyker in the guard. Like a psyker in the guard, right? He starts going wrong. The answer to that one is the commissar is going to shoot him in the brain now. There's like in fantasy though, like one of the lore of light is just like hard counter chaos. Like it forces, because chaos, it's chaos. It's disorderly. It's all over the place. It doesn't follow patterns and stuff, at least raw chaos magic. Whereas the lore of light is like, especially in Age of Sigmar, it's like it's lines, it's geometry, it's shapes and pure unchanging. So you get a lore of light wizard who shows up, waves his hands around, and then all the corn demons kind of just freeze and disintegrate. Which is just kind of a thing I've noticed, is that the ways to keep you safe from magic in fantasy oftentimes are more magic. Whereas 40k, it's stuff like Geller Fields, which there's magic involved, but it's a lot of technology and stuff with it. There's,
it's like a half science, half magic.
Yeah.
They write like chaos language on Geller Fields, don't they? Like they write the inscriptions and bindings, that sort of thing. But then behind it is like an actual generator.
Yeah, like there is a generator. There's the dead dreaming psyker, whatever stuff like that. But there is also actual machines going into it. Whereas a lot of the stuff in fantasy is the magic has gone wrong. Send in the magic that counters the stuff that's going wrong, or chaos has invaded. Get the lore of life wizard.
Whereas in like 40k,
Fire
it's
with
all
fire.
chaosy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's safer things of magic. There's like even within magic itself, that's very pointedly evil magic. You can still counter chaos. For example, necromancy. Undead are nearly immune to chaos unless they decide to join chaos. Like when Vlad sent some blood dragons to fight Khorne, which was not a good idea because blood dragons sure love a fight and Khorne sure loves a fight. And then you got Khorne corrupted vampire knights, and that was not pleasant to deal with.
Shout out to the guy by Darkside who awakened the demon host. This absolutely degenerate man.
Good man. He's not a coward. While there's another boss fight happening.
Yeah, that was fun. Luckily, it killed one person.
I just like the idea of the blood dragons fighting the forces of Khorne. And it's just like, are we winning? I think we're winning. Ew, what? Khorne, he's got an erection. What? He's liking it. Stop. Run. We need to re-strategize.
He's
liking it. Ew.
We did have a donation by Caleb Collins who did say, so this is a battle can cause a certain kind of bloodbending, like female Skaven to do to the worst of us, Colin.
I don't know what you think I'm into, but I assure you the Skaven women are not it.
Nope.
They busted.
No.
Yeah, that was just, I guess, a semi-related like thing to end on, which isn't like a criticism of 40k. It's just magic and fantasy seems to be a bit more like fleshed out and versatile.
There's a chance.
There's
a chance. There's a chance of like combating chaos, whereas in 40k it's like you're just swimming in the same pool.
Yeah, like it can be used to hard counter chaos and stuff. It's also just a little bit more fleshed out, which again, like I said, is not a criticism. It's a fantasy setting. The magic's going to be a lot more important. 40k it's like science fantasy where they're psychers or wizards, but it's also
I mean, there's also the element of in fantasy, it's like we have academies for this kind of thing, whereas 40k it's heresy. Stop that. Now there's more ignorance in 40k where it's like, oh, here's a alpha level psyker. Let's like capture them and make them into something useful like a Colexus. But then otherwise it's like, ugh, no, bad.
We're either killing you or you're going to the golden throne where he will kill you.
Yeah, Emperor just going, yum.
We did have a thing by Mr. Mielov, brother. He says, Sigvold is that one corpse we are all supposed to urinate on. Truly Throg.
Throg, my beloved.
Throg be throgging that corpse, man. With that being said, though, that is essentially the sort of rundown of the magic systems as magic in Warhammer 40k and fantasy. If anyone else has any, sorry, admittedly, Milov again says, yeah, how skipping Mortarian's model was up there for trash day. And Mortarian's not a bad model. I just like to have a bit more like unique things on the tabletop. Like my Angron is not Angron. I think I said it before. My Angron is an Usharan vampire Angron.
Hal has to flex the hipstery, like, oh no, it's not like all the other Mortarians. Mine's a bit.
It's actually cheaper though, because the Age of Sigmar model is like 70 quid, and the Mortarian one is
like $170, I think.
110. Or something.
When I sent Colin, I sent you that image from Warhammer World of the totally not Karl Franz model. I did wonder if you could kit bash that with Celestine with the big wings, if that would look cool. Because I'm like, her wings are kind of cool, but like that,
I don't know. You probably could. It's just like because he's right back there. I should not have pointed behind myself like that. That's going to be a DJ Well, there
that is the cut
right there. Let me move my thumb in the correct. There he is, right by my thumb. There he is, Franz himself. It's the wings are very big, like very big, because it's a griffin. I think you might be able to make it look cool. It's just a matter of like, I don't know how well, because they're clearly designed to be like animalistic, because again, it's a griffin versus.
Oh, sorry, I mean the like the Stormcast, not Karl Franz.
The Celestial Prime.
Yeah.
I think you could probably make those look pretty good. If you kit past that.
Caleb Collins says, worst betrayal, Erebus or Griffith? I mean, it's technically, obviously that's Berserk. It's technically Griffith, because Erebus was never with anybody in the first place. So what the Erebus literally says in his own like novella thing, I never betrayed anyone because I was always loyal to Chaos. Whereas Griffith actually was someone's, was Guts' like friend and stuff. Man, that's Berserk is dark. Like Warhammer's dark. Berserk is the perfect level of like it shouldn't be worse than that. Because at that point, then it's just like scarring. But,
although even in that novella where it's like Erebus at least did what his parents wanted. It was like, oh, you should be more like Erebus, the nice kid. And he's like, okay, I'll be more like Erebus. Kills him, takes his name. But that's not what we meant. Why are you like this?
Although, Andy, I've got some another newer Stormcast model. It's one of those ones that can be a named character or a generic one. I think these wings I'll put it in the Discord. I think these wings would be pretty kick-ass on Celestine.
Oh, they look good. Yeah. Oh, this one. I keep seeing this in all the memes where it's like, what 40k players are getting versus this magnificent model. Like,
people just called me old in the chat. I appreciate that.
That's that is
shout out to Age of Sigmar having the best modeling team.
The character is a redeemed Nurgle champion. Sure enough, called Tornus the Redeemed.
That's a cool concept. They don't really have redeemed chaos things in 40k.
The funny thing about that is that Nurgle seems to be at the ass end of all the redemption stuff because it didn't happen, but like in a Godblight, the Emperor's like, hey, Mortarion, look, one day maybe might be able to redeem you.
Was the ass end intentional? Because that's kind of punny with Nurgle.
Was the what? Oh, it was not intentional. It was a happy coincidence, is what that was.
The redemption, it started in the mouth, and then he went all the way through the chaos tract, and then came out redeemed.
Before we get way too off topic, though, that generally was the magic in Warhammer 40k and Fantasy. If anyone else has any other thoughts to share, that generally is kind of the entire iceberg of it, really. I should always say at the beginning, if you guys did make it this far, please do give the video a cheeky like. It helps us out. If you guys enjoy it as well, we are on some offline stuff like Spotify, Amazon things, and we should have some cool stuff coming up for. There's a new type of video we might try out soon, but we'll see if it comes up in a bit. But thank you guys so much for listening and watching. Love you all. Thank you everyone who donated as well. Really appreciate that. And thank you, Colin, for bringing the Skaven in.
Of course, my beloved,
the Skaven. That being said, see you guys all in the next one. Appreciate you, and have a good one. Right, peace. Bye.